Have you ever seen a disagreement turn into an argument and then spin out of control? Or somebody just took the absolute wrong meaning from what you said and got really mad about it? Me neither. Maybe you lost track of what you were even arguing about and ended up shouting about everything that you're irritated by. In the early 2000s, I was in the Marine Corps and had just gotten married. At the time, the Corps had a much higher divorce rate than the general population. And things like domestic disputes and divorces were using a lot of people's time, energy, and attention, both decreasing individual and unit readiness. On top of the basic facts of the disturbances themselves, each one can have wide-ranging impacts. Morale suffers, people become more difficult to work with. Lots of people throughout the unit have to spend time and energy on disciplinary actions. So work is either delayed or pushed onto other people. The solution that came down from on high was that the base chaplains were to put on mandatory 2-day seminars for all newlyweds. It was not great. There's a lot of eye rolling and snickering and chuckling, especially when a couple times we caught one chaplain sleeping in the back of the room during somebody else's session. It was fun. But here in this session, I'm going to distill the one useful thing that came out of that 2-day session in one brief, digestible session. What they ended up teaching is called active listening. This is a framework for having a structured conversation. And the point is to make sure that both people understand a single point that is being made. The conversation doesn't progress to the next point of contention until both people agree that they understand what was said. One of the keys to active listening is the token. The person who holds the token is the only person who speaks. And when the speaker, the token holder, is done, they surrender it, they hand it over to the other person. The token could be anything that can be held in the hand, but not all tokens are created equal. To be avoided are things that might be weaponized or will break things if they're thrown. If you could imagine it being labeled Exhibit A in a trial, you probably should look for something else. Personally, I find that pot holders have a good size and feel. If you do end up throwing it, they still have a satisfying heft. That is not an official Datadog product. It is not endorsed by Datadog, but anybody can have it. Please do not use it as a pot holder, because I don't know what the thermal temp tolerances are. Courtesy my beautiful bread. Now that we've got our token, somebody get that token, let's see how this works. Let's meet Sam and Terry. They could be anyone. They could be dev and ops. They could be significant others or neighbors. They could be any two people. Sam has a complaint that they need Terry to hear. Sam sits Terry down to listen and identifies the token, and inexplicably, in this case, blue torch lightsaber thing. And Sam states the problem. Maybe it's something around like style guide or writing tests. It could be anything. Now, Terry, not wanting to undermine things because they respect it and care for Sam, they sit down and listen. For the person speaking, it's important to speak to specifics and avoid overgeneralizing and exaggerating. So keep an eye out for phrases like you always or you never. Those are very helpful keys that you're framing things poorly. It's also not helpful to call out names, even if you're absolutely positive that they are a slob. So after Sam has stated their point, Terry is handed the token, and it's now Terry's turn to speak. I'm sorry, I'm from Orlando, so everywhere I go is dry in comparison, so there will be awkward pauses. So Terry's turn to speak, but Terry doesn't respond to the complaint. Terry's job at this phase is to repeat back, to paraphrase, what they think that Sam is saying. Terry may also ask Sam to clarify points of what was said. Once Terry has summarized what Sam has said, and Sam agrees that it's correct, Terry returns the token to Sam. Now, Terry probably won't get the summary right the first time. Like I said, they may ask for clarifications. Sam, when they're holding the token, will clarify or correct, and then return the token back to Sam. And Terry tries to restate their understanding of what Sam is trying to say. This repeats until Sam is satisfied that Terry understands the original complaint. Now that Sam confirms that Terry understands Sam's complaint, Sam gives the token back to Terry, and Terry finally gets to respond to the complaint. The token trades hands, and now Sam must paraphrase what Terry has responded with. Terry's now the one to confirm or deny that both Sam understands Terry's position. And this repeats back and forth until everyone has said their piece. Once they both agree that everybody's been heard, the two can now move towards a resolution. It's been 7 slides, and so far each person has made one statement. But due to the back and forth, the statement, restatement, and confirmation, or synac of the conversation, the pace of the argument is kept low, making it much harder for emotions to boil over. This is a slow process, and that's a feature of it. By making clear the role of speaker and listener explicit, grinding down the pace until you have a confirmation of understanding, it becomes everyone's best interest to listen and considering what they're hearing. This, however, assumes good intent. Now, briefly, some things to avoid: hyperbole, saying things like always or never, or exaggerating. It's important to keep things in perspective. You want to avoid broad or overreaching statements like "you're a slob" rather than "please just put your dirty clothes in the hamper." You want to avoid personal jabs, and this is definitely not the time for jokes, sarcasm, or snark. Now, arguments aren't necessarily a bad thing, but they're harmful or unproductive. If they're harmful or unproductive, nothing gets addressed, never mind, gets resolved. So everybody involved needs to be acting in good faith. Now, active listening is very easy to derail by a bad actor. I like to think that this, too, is a feature rather than a flaw. There are plenty of ways that somebody can be a bad actor, but there's only one way to participate in active listening. Now, sometimes it's a matter of time and place, but if somebody continually refuses to participate, then they're signaling they don't respect your concerns. So, again, restating, active listening slows down the pace of the argument. It keeps emotions from running high and makes heated escalations less likely. By being assured that you will be heard, people can listen and absorb what is being said, rather than trying to time their quick encounters. Ensuring that every point is being said is understood by both people before moving on to the next. Now, there are a couple of really fun side effects that personally in my life have come from my wife and I being aware of active listening. Sometimes one of us will just come in hot and heavy, riled up, and just jump right into ranting. Now, the side effect here is that once they've gone for like a minute or two, it becomes apparent that the problem that they're yelling about doesn't have anything to do with me. And at this point, I can say something, even if we're not sure, we can ask, are you complaining to me or at me? But by the time we've gotten this far, it's usually to me. So I can sit back, relax, and respond with the appropriate supportive platitudes, like, oh, how could they? Now, another fun outcome, especially useful for shorter tirades, is after she has said her piece, I can hold up a token, even a less recommended one, and say something like, what I'm hearing is that I am not what's pissing you off. Laughter ensues, and it's good at defusing the stress, unless I chose a really bad moment at work token. Now, as fun as quipping is, talking past one another just isn't a great way to communicate. What we as humans usually want is to be heard and understood. Increasingly, we might have to have an active listening with someone who isn't physically present, especially over the past couple of years. This actually shouldn't change too much. I recommend, if you're doing this over a video conference, keep the cameras on. And in place of a token, I'd recommend using the chat to acknowledge when you're changing hands, who is in charge at the moment, who can speak at the moment. Now, I don't know of a system that allows you to account for only one speaker at a time via like mute. That is, one that doesn't let either one person control everything or allow the other person to unmute themselves. But in reality, if both people are communicating in good faith, remotely participating in active listening, it shouldn't change much. So, the things that you need both people to be acting in good faith. They need to understand the rules and the flow. They need to be sincere and show respect for each other. You should avoid exaggeration, leave out sarcasm and jokes, and choose your tokens wisely. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that all of this helps you to argue better.